Before I talk about tax, I just want to say that your part of the world has a special place for me. Spent lots of time on Dartmoor, in and around Devon, Totnes. I've got lots of friends. So I wish I was there in person, but I'm not. So I'm here from London. Just to kick off, some of you might have come across my organisation, but some might not. So I run a group called Tax Justice UK. We've been around for about 6 years, and we were set up by the Global Tax Justice Network. And our job is to build political, public, media pressure, momentum to get a fairer tax system. That's what we do. We're a relatively small organisation, so there's just 6 of us. But we're really interested in how we can shape and change the public, media and political discussion on tax. I think lots of us will be aware that the UK is facing a whole range of crises. And in our view, we need a transformed tax system to help sort out and deal with these crises. So first of all, we have a crisis of public services and public investment, where there just simply isn't enough money going into public services and kind of like wider government spending. So I'd include social security within that. And we can see that in the state of our hospitals, in the state of our schools, in the state of our roads. We know that this needs more money. We need to have more money raised through taxes to help support our public services. The second crisis we're facing is a crisis of inequality. There's huge amounts of wealth and income inequality in this country. And then layer on top of that, you have inequality around gender, around race, around class, lots of different types of inequalities, which are pulling our communities apart and hindering our ability to have a really, truly thriving country. Thirdly, we are facing climate and environmental crises, and we really need to think about how the government can use the tax system to try and deal with both of those. Part of that is around raising more money to invest in infrastructure and different infrastructure. Part of it is also using the tax system to change behaviour and encourage the types of things that we need to see. And then I think finally we have a crisis of democracy, where we have cynicism about our politics, where we have power and wealth are concentrated in the hands of the few. And at Tax Justice UK, we believe that in order to deal with these 4 crises, we need to think about how we transform the tax system. We need to have a tax system that is raising more money, a tax system that is helping to redistribute from the really wealthy to everyone else, and a tax system that is set up to encourage the type of behaviour we want to see and we need to see, rather than at the moment where often antisocial behaviour, and think of that defined really broadly, is subsidised by our current tax system. So as I said, at Tax Justice UK, we are fighting for a fairer tax system, but for us, this is part of a wider agenda of economic and political transformation. We see ourselves as allies, as within a wider ecosystem of groups and organisations that are pushing for a fairer economy, a fairer politics, a fairer country for all of us. And so that's, where my kind of like link in is to Laurie and the work that he's been doing on that. So we all know that we are in basically the long election campaign. We're starting to get into the period of an election, which will almost certainly happen next year, probably in the autumn. Both Conservatives and Labour will be pushed on tax and spending. We know where the state of public services are, that both parties are going to want to be thinking really hard about the offer that they'll make at the election. One of the things that I think is interesting just to think about in terms of the Conservatives is they often talk about tax cuts, but what they have actually done in practice, particularly over the last 5 or 6 years, is increase taxes, and increase taxes actually quite substantially on a range of ordinary working people. And they've mostly done this by freezing the different thresholds for the different types of taxes. At the same time, Labour is promising to transform public services. And it's really difficult to see how Labour will be able to deliver on that promise and the public expectation if they form the next government without more investment and without more spending. Labour has already committed to, it's a bit fuzzy on exactly what this commitment means, but they've committed to £28 billion potentially of government borrowing on green and climate issues. And I imagine Labour will be doing everything they can to stretch that promise to cover as much as possible. But it is still likely that Labour will need more money from tax to help support investment in public services. Some of this, I imagine, will be announced as part of the manifesto. You know, Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, has promised a fully costed manifesto, so we'll see some tax rises as part of the manifesto. But I also think we may and are expecting tax changes, summarising perhaps, that aren't in the manifesto that will happen after an election if Labour do win. Labour has already committed to some tax changes. I would argue that most of these are symbolic as opposed to really big revenue raisers. So some of the things that Labour has already committed to is ending non-dom status. So this is how wealthy individuals can often end up living in the UK but not pay tax in the UK. Labour have also promised to impose VAT on private school fees and increase taxes on private equity. If you add up the total, that probably comes to about £4 or £5 billion. So that's a good chunk of money, but probably is not the type of money that is going to be needed to really transform public services. I think it's worth reflecting that whoever wins the next election, it is going to be, it's a difficult picture. Public services are on their knees. There's a lot of public pressure for investment. There's a lot of public pressure for visible change. And the current baseline budget that has been put forward by Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak imagines that there will be lots of spending cuts after the next election. I think it will be very politically difficult to actually make those spending cuts. So I think we're probably in an era of more public spending and probably higher taxes. Just as a sort of side note, I think all of us can perhaps remember the car crash that was the Liz Truss government. One of the things that I think that was interesting about that is it really did show the political limits of a libertarian, low tax, small state agenda, particularly right now. The alternative to that sort of Liz Truss, small state, low taxes, is proper investment backed up by higher taxes. And at Tax Justice UK, we have a couple of areas that we really want to focus on. And the main one is around how we can ensure that we are taxing the wealthiest in our society properly. In the UK, there is huge wealth inequality. The pandemic saw the wealth of those at the top increase. And if we take a longer perspective, since the 1980s, wealth has ballooned compared to income. There's been a huge increase in wealth inequality since the 1980s, but the amount of money that the government gets from taxes on wealth has stayed broadly the same. One of the things that comes up quite a lot is people say, oh, but the rich, the wealthiest, they pay lots of money in tax. And I think something that's important to remember is actually this huge variation in how much tax those who are wealthy actually pay. If you are a banker and you're on PAYE and you pay income tax, you probably pay quite a lot of tax, both in a total amount and as a proportion of your income. Whereas if you get your income from wealth, from investments, from other means, then you can pay a much lower rate of tax. The best example I can give of this is Rishi Sunak published a summary of his tax affairs a month ago, and it turns out that he is paying the same effective tax rate as the average nurse. And we did that little calculation as a way of just symbolizing and turning into a really, I think, hopefully visible, tangible story, the way different people in the tax system are treated in different ways. And the reason Rishi Sunak pays such a low effective tax rate is because he gets most of his income from his investments, and therefore he pays capital gains tax rather than income tax, and capital gains tax is set at a very low rate compared to income tax. And I'll come on to that in a moment. So one of the things that we do, and is really important as campaigners, is set out what we think the alternative should be. Last year, we put out a briefing on 5 different policy changes that could raise up to £37 billion. A couple of months ago in the budget, we revised that because there were some new revenue estimates and we added an extra policy. And so we now have 6 different measures that could raise £50 billion per year. So this is a really substantial amount of money that would go a long way to dealing with investment in public services. And I will just pop a link in the chat to that little briefing paper so you can have a look. As part of reforming the tax system, the first thing that we think we need to do is fix the existing taxes on wealth. So we have a whole range of different ways in which we already tax wealth and income from wealth. The top one for us is, at the moment, income from wealth is taxed at a lower level from income from work. So as I said, that is the reason why Rishi Sunak pays such a low effective tax rate compared to how much money he makes. So something we would like to see is income from wealth taxed at the same rate as income from work. And we could do this by increasing things like capital gains tax, or ensuring that national insurance contributions, NICs, are charged to landlords' income and landlords' rental income. And so that is a very mainstream idea. The last time it was actually done was under Margaret Thatcher's government. There are other loopholes the government should close, loopholes when it comes to inheritance tax. So for example, at the moment, if you list in AIM shares on the alternative stock market, it's often like tech shares, you don't have to pay any inheritance tax on them because of the way the tax system in inheritance tax is structured. So there's lots of ways in which the government, a future Labour government, this government could raise more money by closing loopholes under our existing taxes on wealth, and really patching up the system. But it's also important to think about taxing the underlying stock of wealth, so people's assets. And here I want to be really clear that we are talking in our proposals about taxing the super rich, the really wealthy. We would like to see a wealth tax for those with assets over £10 million. And the way this would work is you get the first £10 million tax-free. You wouldn't pay any wealth tax on the first £10 million of assets. And then after that, you could pay 1% on those assets, which would raise £16 billion a year. Or if you had a 2% tax, it would raise £22 billion. This is a lot of money that could really do a lot of good, both in terms of supporting public services, but also redistributing wealth. One of the reasons to think about a wealth tax is that if you actually want to reduce wealth inequality, and if you actually want to ensure the super rich are paying something and paying their fair share, a wealth tax like this is one of the few ways of doing it. And we've worked with sort of world-class academics at LSE and the University of Warwick who've laid out exactly how you could do this, how it would work, what the policy would be. So it makes sense from a sort of economic and policy point of view, but it also makes sense from a political point of view. And a recent poll that we did found that 78% of voters would back a wealth tax on assets over £10 million. So I think there's a range of different ways in which a future Labour government or any government could raise quite substantial amounts of money and also help to tackle the inequality that we see in our country. And again, I just want to be really clear, these are not just sort of ideas we've dreamt up. All of these policies are backed up by rigorous analysis and work by leading academics and think tankers. Now, often I think the response to big vision, big ideas for how we transform our politics is cynicism. And I can really understand that because politics is difficult. The last, decade has been quite dispiriting, I think, particularly for people who are progressives. But as a campaigner, I think it is really important to have some optimism and to have, I suppose, realistic optimism, if that makes sense. And so just to talk about, I do think that we can achieve this, and I do think this is possible. For example, over the last couple of years, we've worked with partners to help secure 3 different U-turns from this current Conservative government, including the introduction of a windfall tax on North Sea oil and gas extraction. So there is a way, if we're smart in how we do our campaigning and smart in how we do our politics, that we can actually win. In terms of taxing wealth, something I've seen since I've started working on this issue is the way in which the debate has gone from non-existent to really, it's there in the newspapers, it's there in the media, it's there in Westminster. People are talking about taxing wealth and wealth taxes. Now, some of that discussion is people saying they think it's a bad idea and we shouldn't do it. Some of it is people saying it's a good idea and we should do it. But I think the starting point to achieving any campaign success is getting the debate going, getting people talking about it, getting a really broad range of individuals, politicians, the public engaged in this issue. We're also, in terms of more specifically with Labour, we've worked with people across and are working with people across the spectrum within the Labour Party, from those on the left of the party to those on the right. And there are people, again, across the Labour Party within the parliamentary party who are interested in the idea of taxing wealth more. We also talk with people within the shadow cabinet and within the advisors around the leadership. And again, trying to make the argument that taxing wealth more is a politically and economically sensible way of raising much needed revenue. We are going to keep the pressure up on Labour, on other political parties as we go into the election. Part of our job as campaigners is to create the political, the public, the media space that allows politicians to step into it. This is a long-term campaign. We want to see our tax system transformed in a way that it is more progressive and raises more money to support public services. That is going to take time, but I think we have all to play for. And I think it is absolutely essential that we get Labour and other political parties to a place where they are supportive of a fairer tax system. And I do think that is something that we can do. I'm going to stop there in a minute. If you want to hear more from us, I do a really short, hopefully pithy weekly newsletter that you can sign up to, and I'll share the link in the chat. And we work with our supporters, the people who signed up. You can learn and read more about what we're doing, but we also have actions and activities that people can do. For example, most recently, we have just run a Right to MP campaign, and out of our 50,000 supporters, we had 8,500 emails sent that went to almost every MP across the country. And even if MPs disagree, it means they still have to think about it. They realize they're getting pressure from their constituents. They have to engage, but it's also highlighted that there are a number of MPs who are actually quite supportive of this agenda and what we're trying to do. So I think I'm cautiously optimistic about what we can achieve. I'm cautiously optimistic about what a potential future Labour government could achieve. I think it is important that Labour Party members and outside activists and campaigners keep up the pressure and really make the case and continue to make the case that if we want to see the transformed society, economy, country that I think all of us do, a transformed tax system has to be at the heart of that vision. Thank you.